Welcome back. You're watching Guardians of Gaia, connecting people and planet on Channel 263. Now let's hear from South Africans about the importance of a sustainable food system for nutrition and health.
So it's been an interesting journey within the food system where we're saying, let's make it sustainable, let's make it available. And also dealing with hunger, because there are situations where you meet people, they'll say, I don't have food. Then you say, can I give you seeds to go and plant? And you eat from your own garden. And that's been the drive with the organization that we started as African Women in Agriculture, to say, let's get households to also have their own home gardens instead of having just a food parcel. You eat whatever vegetables you want growing at the small space that you have at home. You do your own compost using your leaves to nourish your soil, and what seeds to grow in what season. And we also encourage people to say, whatever you've overgrown, share with your neighbors as well. So that spirit of Ubuntu, of sharing, is what we're encouraging.
The food garden is important because of you're eating from what you did by yourself, organic food, and you know what did you put? You put manure, you put by yourself, not by buying from somewhere. And it's very good. It's good and fresh for our health, because what we are having every day, we are diabetic and we're taking tablets which we don't know what is in there. And the food we are eating is the food which you made by yourself, and you know what, you didn't put any chemicals in that food. It is even to market your food, it's when you're telling someone that it's fresh from the garden, and then people, they are happy to hear that than going and buy from the street or somewhere else. They come to our garden and they buy our food. Yeah.
As we've heard, it is essential to have a sustainable food system, one that has food accessible, affordable, and also healthy. Up next, we profile people practicing environmentalism, and today we join Ratlo Mabula and Kevin Bloom, two journalists who are dedicated to upholding the truth and reporting the reality of the climate change crisis in South Africa.
Let's just be wary about what our environment needs. Because if you don't give it what it needs, it also retaliates. And you know, the retaliation of nature can never be compared to anything. There were wild animals here. Where are the jackals? Where are the hyenas? In this ecosystem that we have, there's a link that is missing. What happened? In terms of environment, we do see great difference. The difference with the heat, it's not normal. It was never like this before. The rain used to fall. Now it takes time, and when it does, sometimes it damages things. It's easier these days to have sinuses. Why this is happening? Questions have to be answered. Then you have environmental groups that tell you the reason we are having this is because of the emission that comes from power stations. It's because of the dust that comes from coal. But the reality is that I do spot difference. Waterberg FM 99.3, go with the flow. My name is Ratlo Mabula, and warm welcome to tonight's edition, where we are focusing on the impact, emissions, and other carbon dioxide contributions that are there that are negatively impacting. Communication is about acknowledgement. So if I'm a radio presenter or I'm a journalist, I'm representing the community that cannot speak at that particular time. They cannot ask the questions. Sometimes they are not so privileged enough to know the information I know. That's why I emphasize the issue of responsible journalism, because when you've researched your story, you would know what to present to who and how without doing any damage, just to open the eyes of the people so that people may know that as we do this, these are the consequences. We've got power stations, and they are contributing immensely to the economy, unfortunately. But I think the conversation we should be having, if we want to sustain the economy at this particular stage, is to say, okay, how do we ensure that you comply with the issue of emission? So for me, let's be honest there. What structures are put in place to ensure that after doing what you are doing, whatever that you are burning, where does it go? Because we can't stop them now. Over 100,000 people are employed there. So if you stop that instantly, then the economy is going to suffer. Not against anything, and it's good to have developments in our areas. But I just wish the powers that be and those that are in the know have to be honest. If as a radio station you want to run a particular story or narrative to say people should be aware of the dangers in the environment as a result of Project 123, and then Project 123 comes to the station and say, hey, look, we want to partner with you, we're going to give you 1 million per month. What's going to happen? And that is betraying the community that lacks information.
So there are media outlets out there which are quite clearly bought and paid for by these global commercial interests. Peer-reviewed scientific consensus says there's a direct link between our burning of carbon and the heating of the atmosphere, and that oil, coal and natural gas are responsible for 90% of that. What big oil does is use the science and the media against itself, and that has cost us in terms of the ability of civilization to sustain itself.
The type of leaders we have, are they aware about environment? Are they aware about implications of what is happening now is going to cause for the near future?
I was at the World Conference of Science Journalists in July last year, and difficult questions are asked. You say that by 2030 we have to halve our carbon emissions, otherwise it's the end of civilization as we know it. Can we do it? Because my back of the envelope calculation says we're going to hit 2 degrees globally by 2030. By 2060, we're going to be pushing 3.5. At those levels, you don't want to be in sub-Saharan Africa. Unlivable. Can't grow crops, can't sustain livestock. So what do you do? What do you do? And the only answer to that is to go back to the wisdom of nature itself. You know, if there was one take-home from there, it's that all journalism is climate journalism. This is the ultimate lens. Our politics and our economics and our cultural disagreements all take place within this framework.
If your department has not delivered water, yours is to come here and account for the injustice you have subjected those people to. Apologize genuinely and say, we have messed up here, instead of giving people false hope. And that's the big problem I'm realizing, especially with communicators in the country. They think you are inviting them to be attacked, but we only want clarity.
Human rights are completely implicated in environmental rights. Your desecration of nature is fundamentally linked to your desecration of the other in human form.
Here we are on Earth. The reality is that the future is a bit bleak, but it's in our hands. If we are willing to change, we will do something that goes along that line. But if we don't want to change, we will also continue with the system we have. There is hope, though that hope is like a dot in a very big, dark place.
That was from the series Not on Our Soil by African Climate Reality Project, where journalists Ratlo Mabula and Kevin Bloom argue that because of the ecological breakdown that we face, all journalism is climate journalism. Next up on our environmental education slot is part 2 of the series on genetically modified organisms in South Africa. In this episode, we look at the impact of GMO cotton, maize and soybean crops, and of course people, indigenous crops and land.
South Africa was the first African nation to commercially grow GM crops with the planting of Monsanto's BT cottonseed in 1997. This was followed closely by the commercial growing of BT maize seed, Monsanto 810 in 1998, and herbicide-tolerant HT cotton and soybean in 2000. GM cotton and GM maize crops were planted in South Africa years before South Africa's GMO Act and the Cartagena Protocol on Biosafety came into force under the United Nations Convention on Biological Diversity. It therefore did not comply with international best practice. These early decisions going back more than 2 decades have had massive implications for us as South Africans. South Africa is the 9th largest producer of GM crops in the world and grows a total of about 2.7 million hectares of GM crops of soybeans, maize and cotton. The 3 crops that may be cultivated in South Africa are soya, maize and cotton with what we call a 2-trait technology. Maize is a staple food for most people on the African continent. Overall, about 90% of South African maize is genetically modified. 80% of the maize crop was genetically engineered to survive glyphosate spraying. In 2015, South African authorities approved Monsanto's drought-tolerant GM maize. The ACB and civil society groups have been raising concerns since 2008 that Monsanto's GM drought-tolerant trait is bogus. In April 2017, the ACB is appealing the decision to approve the maize to the High Court, supported by more than 25,000 concerned citizens who signed petitions and submitted objections. Approximately 95% of all soya produced in South Africa is from Monsanto's GM soybean seed. 100% of cotton grown in South Africa is genetically modified, but is grown on less than 20,000 hectares. GM technology is owned by very few powerful transnational corporations that have become known as the Big Six: Monsanto, DuPont, Syngenta, Dow, Bayer, and BASF. All of these companies have been active in developing and promoting GMOs in South Africa today. South Africa exports maize for food and animal feed to several countries across the globe. There have been many experiments on GM crops in South Africa over the years, but due to successful resistance campaigns, most of them never made it to market. Years of campaigning by ACB and the South African public against the potato crop yielded a positive result. GM fortified sorghum was rejected due to concerns that it would contaminate wild sorghum relatives. Work done on GM yeasts and grapes for wine never made it out of the lab. South African Sugarcane Research Institute has worked on varieties with sucrose, yield, pest and disease, agronomic and milling. There have been few results to date. GMOs are regulated by the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries, DAF, according to the GMO Act of 1999. A body called the Executive Council is responsible for decision-making. Representatives from DAF, the Department of Water Affairs and Forestry, Environmental Affairs, Health, Trade and Industry, Science and Technology, Labour and Arts and Culture sit on the council. They get technical scientific advice from an advisory committee. The identity of the people represented on this committee is a secret, so we have no idea if they have the necessary skills to do the job or if they have conflicts of interest. Concerns about the way GMOs are regulated include that the risk assessment is not designed to look for long-term risks. Toxic weed killers such as glyphosate used with the GMOs are not subject to risk assessment. No independent research is carried out. Instead, the companies provide the safety data, which is accepted by the EC. Peer review science is not required, and a lot of the research that is submitted to government is a secret, as it is protected as confidential business information. It is impossible for the public to access information and to be meaningfully involved in the decision-making process. South African authorities have wholeheartedly embraced this highly controversial GM technology and given multinational corporations complete control over our food and food system. The path that has been chosen has been toward an inequitable and ecologically unsustainable, large-scale, industrial and chemical-intensive food production. However, there is a growing South African movement calling for the transformation of our food system. You can participate by supporting local farmers and small food businesses. You can also subscribe to the ACB mailing list to be alerted of applications for new GM licenses which require public comment and other new developments around GMOs in our country.
Thank you so much for being with us as we tackle the topic of food and farming for the future. A special thanks to Me and Bee Clothing for this beautiful dress I'm wearing. Join us again next week on Guardians of Gaia, connecting people and planet as we explore the environmental world